He's wearing a Brinks Security Service uniform on, but we'll just let the police department figure it out.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the special city council meeting for 5:30 p.m., May 8th, 2024. We do have a quorum, so could we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Mendoza?
Here.
Vice Mayor Meyer?
Here.
Councilmember Orlovins?
Here.
Councilmember Pearson?
Here.
Mayor Bryant?
Here. If you could join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This evening, the public comment period will be 5 minutes, and at this time, we will open public comments. Margaret.
At this time, the public present in the chambers and on Zoom are permitted to address the City Council on the closed session agenda item. Remarks for D1 should wait till council consideration of that item. When The public will have a chance to comment after staff's presentation. If you're participating via Zoom, please raise your hand to speak under public comment. If you're in person, please file a speaker card. We'll take public comment from the chambers, then Zoom. Remarks are limited to 5 minutes. Your microphone will be muted if you speak on items that do not pertain to this agenda item or after the timer is expired. And we received no written public comments for this item. I have one speaker card in person. Danny Dorman.
Thank you. I want to make sure this public comment is for the closed session, or is this your typical open comment?
For the closed session.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Sorry for the rush of breath. I had to fly down here. I didn't realize what time it was. As late as last night, it just reiterated my comments regarding our interim city attorney. You can go back and look at records. I really didn't have time to do the splice and send and everything, but our current interim city attorney pushes back anytime there's a discussion regarding not just staff, but anything city related. There's the infamous agree to disagree that Councilwoman Mendoza went through with our city attorney. I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong, but I thought our city attorney and that whole group is to look out for us, the citizens of Brentwood, be it you, be it staff, but most importantly, be it us. And yet, I really can't think of a time where she fought for our interest and not for other parties that are not affiliated with us, vis-a-vis developers. And I really am, and I hope you guys will look into this when you go into closed session, I really can't think of a time where she fought for the interests of our city. And as I said, last night was just a prime example. The bickering back, and I will say bickering back and forth between our interim city attorney and both of the commissioners, Johnson and Spaulding. I was here. It took 45 minutes to clarify what should be done with a sign that's been up for too long. 45 minutes. And the CUP aspect of it, well, I left at 10 o'clock, so I don't know how long that lasted. But I'm talking an hour and a half with respect to just those two, which should have been seemingly simple items. And that is, to me, not a one-off. As I said, she, at one time, I think she's pushed back against all of you, except for maybe you, Councilman Orleans, but she has pushed back. And again, it's always been not in the interest of the city. And as I said, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not the role of our city attorney. And you're getting ready to go into closed session, have no idea other than, I don't know if you're going to, I don't know what you guys are going to do. But I hope this is the opportunity to really look inside, look at what the city needs, and ask, do we want to have someone who is not looking out for us? Thank you.
Thank you. I have one hand raised in Zoom. Cinziana, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. If I am still unclear if this is a public comment for the closed session or for the agenda item related to the emergency ordinance.
This is public comment for closed session. You can speak on the emergency ordinance when that item is heard by council.
Okay, I will keep it brief for the closed session. I would like to urge you to consider a candidate for a city attorney that it's residents driven, it's focused on the well-being of a community and willing to support you as the residents' representatives. And as the previous speaker mentioned, and I don't know if this is a fact or not, if the current assistant city attorney is one of the candidates, please do yourself and Brentwood residents a favor and do not install her as our future city attorney. Along the years, and even you've noticed during your tenures, she's never supporting the residents. She's never willing to produce information that helps your hard decisions that you have to make day in and day out during your jobs. And she simply demonstrated she doesn't care about our community and doesn't have Brentwood's best interest at heart. So please take this into consideration. It is not just my opinion. I'm pretty sure it's at least the opinion of some of you who encounter her pushbacks over and over again, and the lack of collaboration. And I mean, a couple of examples have been presented, and I just can't forget the O'Hara apartment example when she simply ignored the fact and did not provide any kind of information on vehicular space on allowed for by law, and if that project actually complies or not with that requirement of the law. So, and we can go on and on bringing examples. I mean, we've experienced even during Measure L. She was named as the land use expert, and definitely she supported the developers in that situation. It is a public record. Everyone can hear it, everyone can see it, everyone can read it. So please take this into consideration in making your hard decision tonight. And I really thank you for the opportunity to speak and for all your hard work in selecting a very good city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no additional hands raised.
At this time, we will close public comments and we will move into item D1, which is a public hearing. It is the extension of interim urgency ordinance allowing permittees to install pad-mounted transformers within development projects. And we will now hear an item related to this presented by Alan Bacalar. Alan.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council. As you had mentioned, this is the extension of the urgency ordinance allowing permittees to install pad-mounted transformers within development projects. As a way of background, on March 26, 2024, City Council approved the interim urgency ordinance implementing a modification to Brentwood Municipal Code Section 16.120.120, allowing above-ground or pad-mounted transformers within developments. On April 23rd of this year, City Council directed staff to determine if A, size limits on surf-mounted transformers may be imposed, and if that is not feasible, a limit on the number of homes to be served per transformer, if that can be imposed. And also B, confirm whether PG&E is required to abide by Brentwood regulations in this regard. Staff is currently working on City Council's direction and intends to return to City Council with a permanent ordinance for consideration at a future City Council meeting. The interim urgency ordinance that is currently in effect is set to expire on Friday, May 10th, basically 2 days from now. If extended, the urgency ordinance will be extended by an additional 10 months and 15 days. Again, today, staff is presenting for City Council to consider the extension of the urgency ordinance allowing permittees to install pad-mounted transformers within development projects. Recapping, so currently, we have a current nationwide shortage of subsurface transformers with 2028, the year 2028 as the earliest estimate for subsurface transformer availability. In these pictures, you see an example of a subsurface transformer on the left installed within a residential subdivision, and on the right, above ground transformer or pad mounted transformer. As a quick recap of other cities' undergrounding requirements, these are a list of cities studied, and we found that many of them did not require underground transformers, and those that did require them included exemptions to allow pad-mounted transformers, primarily at the discretion of the city engineer, depending on various factors such as availability and feasibility. Current projects in Brentwood affected by this shortage are shown here. We have a number of residential subdivisions currently either in plan check, going through entitlement, or actually just starting construction. We have also Costco, which includes, the reason why they're part of this list is because they have a subdivision as part of their entitlement, which makes them subject to this requirement, and Lazy Dog as well. Quick recap of the fiscal impact. There is no fiscal impact resulting from the extension of the urgency ordinance. If not adopted, future fiscal impacts include $1.7 million estimated in projects for near-term engineering and inspection fees. This would be pushed out until such time that they would be able to move forward and start construction. It wouldn't make sense for them to start construction if they're not able to supply power to the homes they're going to be building or to the businesses they're creating. Also, there would be a delay in the approximate $1.6 million in annual revenue from the affected commercial developments, specifically Costco and Lazy Dog. There are other fiscal impacts which we did not get into detail, but it's kind of a domino effect if developers are not able to get their civil improvements done, their roadways, their utilities, grading, and other things that would also mean they're not going to be able to pull building permits. Building permits themselves for each one will have their own fees collected and other revenues produced. Quick recap of the municipal code section revisions. Primarily to item 4D, we're adding it or changing it or adding that in the event such a waiver is granted as to a residential development for pad-mounted transformers, the developer shall be responsible for installing screening to the satisfaction of the city engineer. And to general provision item 5, this is a new section being added. The city engineer may waive undergrounding requirements as to equipment pertinent to underground facilities, such as surface-mounted transformers, pedestal-mounted terminal boxes, and meter cabinets and concealed ducts if unusual topographical soil or any other unusual problems, such as prolonged supply chain delays, which we are facing today, make such underground installations unreasonable or impracticable in accordance to the following. And these are the three things that have to happen. The affected developer or utility company may submit information supporting a request for a waiver. And in the event that the waiver is granted to a residential development, they would have to install screening per PG&E's guidelines. And also lastly, the city engineer's authority to waive such requirement shall sunset on December 31st, 2028, unless otherwise amended by the city council before then. Quick recap of screening options for pad-mounted transformers. Again, they would be consistent with PG&E's guidelines for screening. They primarily consist of landscaping, retaining or planar walls, stones, or other options, such as gates. PG&E currently does not allow permit painting of their transformers with decorative art. Lastly, staff is recommending that City Council adopt, sorry for the past tense there, adopt the extension of the urgency ordinance allowing permittees to install pad-mounted transformers within development projects. As a reminder, in order to pass this, we would require a 4/5 vote for adoption. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions of staff at this time?
Yes,
Vice Mayor?
thank you. So to clarify, we do not have an answer from PG&E as far as the size or number of pad transformers we could allow per unit. Is that right?
That is correct. I have reached out to PG&E, but we have not been able to have a meeting just yet.
Are we concerned that that meeting is going to be pushed out, or that they're not going to be willing to discuss that?
That's not a concern of mine. No, I
Okay,
think
good to hear.
They've been open. It's just, as you can imagine, they've been really busy with other things as well. And they did send me a response. We're just trying to find a time that we could talk.
Okay, thank you for that. As far as the screening, do we have any say on that? And would they, if we did have a design standard for that, would they meet that design standard with the suggestions? I mean, I saw the trees and the fencing and everything, but I wanted to know if they would meet a standard if we had one there. And also, how do they determine which happens where? Which screening option?
So PG&E has examples of screening options. Definitely when, I've already seen plans being changed to reflect the screening. From what I'm seeing, a lot of the developers are electing for more shrubbery or kind of a more landscape screening methodology so far in residential developments. As to, I think PG&E's biggest concern would be just the clearance from the boxes to make sure there's adequate space around the boxes and that their folks can get to the boxes from the sidewalk or from a public space. What it ultimately looks like, I don't think they are too specific. As long as it's clear of the boxes, there's enough clearance around it, and that they're able to get to the box in front of it.
And we wouldn't necessarily have a say either. Is that right?
Well, I do have the authority when I do look at it that, and let's say if council had design standards that was placed, I would make sure that they would follow those.
Okay. And in Brentwood, we have very specific standards when it comes to landscaping based in part on our heat and water situation and the rest of that. Do those line up with the choices that they've suggested?
From what I've seen, yes. Yes, it's primary shrubbery. I think the more concerning items would be like more grass. I think those are the ones that takes up a lot more water. But we do have requirements that the proposed landscaping be, drought tolerant and subject to different requirements. So
Okay.
I'll make sure of that.
And I think my last is sort of a question, sort of a comment, but in looking at this as a permanent ordinance, which we're eventually looking to get toward, I don't think I agree with that. I think I would rather do this on an annual basis and just kind of evaluate the market at that time. Where in the process could we make a change like that if council majority voted for that?
I'd have to defer to Karen Murphy on this one.
Thank you very much. So in a permanent ordinance, the council could consider options or could include provisions regarding annual review, if I'm understanding your question correctly. But if not, please let me know and I'd be happy to address it.
Thank you. Really, in looking at the 4-year plus plan for this, it seems like we could next year, later on this year, there could be this influx of the parts needed to do these things correctly, or the way that are considered standards for Brentwood, the way we prefer. And I don't want to put us into a place of having to accept a project with a pad mounted if the parts are available, because we've already said we've got a permanent ordinance through 2028.
Of course. So the permanent ordinance, first of all, could always be amended at any point. down the road. So for example, if some of the supply chain issues change, then the ordinance could be amended to change the end date or to adjust any of the provisions in the ordinance. It would take some time in terms of, you'd have to have the first reading and second reading of the ordinance and move it forward, but that could get adopted, and then the new standards could be implemented. In addition, if there are some specific requirements, we could include language in the ordinance that if certain things happen, then certain other requirements would be in effect. So that could be something that could be considered when the ordinance is being drafted.
Thank you. And I guess my last question then would be for Darren, and is more for the commercial end of things. We're not being quite as rigid on these, the pad-mounted units for commercial as we are for residential. So would there still be some sort of landscaping around that? Are we still looking at trying to make them less offensive to the eye, if you will?
Yes, so let me take a step back, if you don't mind, Vice Mayor. So this evening is an urgency ordinance. So currently, as the council understands, you adopted this urgency ordinance, which will expire in 2 days. And so this is that ordinance, which cannot be amended when you go to and extend it this evening. And Alan can give you a time frame. At the last, or I think it was about a month and a half ago, or I guess within the last month, the city council had a discussion related to a ordinance for this issue, and that's coming back in July or August. Is that correct, Alan?
That's correct, if not sooner.
So the idea is this is just the interim ordinance until you can do this full, your permanent ordinance. And in that meeting, that's where the city council will be able to add language if you want to add additional restrictions to ensure that commercial boxes, which might be bigger, are screened appropriately according to a city standard, landscape standard. That would be the appropriate time. And the same thing of the question that you asked, Karen, related to when do you want to do an annual review if there's a change? And there could probably be language that Alan might be able to include that says if the shortage discontinues prior to December of 2028 or whatever date it is, that staff would bring it back for council's consideration for amendment.
That does help, because we are voting tonight. I want to make sure I'm voting in the way that, represents what residents are going to want. So I appreciate all the extra details. Thank you.
And really the purpose that we were hoping to have a permanent ordinance in place prior to having to renew this, but with the council's direction, which is making this ordinance even better as it relates to the size of the boxes, or how many homes might be serviced by each box. That's what's taken some additional time, and that's the reason why we're before you this evening, to hopefully extend this urgency ordinance this evening.
That helps. Thank you, Darren. And thank you.
Any further clarifying questions?
I have one question. Why do you need engineer's authority till 2028 on tonight? You shouldn't need that tonight. You should only need that for 10 months and whatever days. Why are you asking for that tonight and not when the emergency ordinance, when the permanent ordinance comes up?
I think we added that because of the understanding that the PG&E shortage or the subsurface transformer shortage seems, from at least the latest expectation from PG&E, was that they would not be available until 2028.
And what was the source data for 2028? Because today, didn't PG&E come out and say that they should be available in 2024?
I'm not aware of that, but that at that time when we started this, it was an actual advisory letter from PG&E that I received that did say they would not be available until 2028.
Yeah, so the spokesperson came out and said 2024, so probably mid to late 2024. So I would feel very uncomfortable voting for something to go through 2028. Well, we can talk about it during discussion. Thanks.
Councilmember Mendoza, could I maybe answer your question, or maybe Karen Murphy can answer this? This ordinance, although states 2028, does it have an expiration date?
It does have an expiration date. It will expire in approximately 10 months.
If we look at slide number 7, is that municipal code or is that just urgency ordinance? Page 7. I think it was page 7. That 16.120.120A provisional item number 5 does that stand alone or does it stand wrapped into the urgency ordinance?
These are through the urgency ordinance, these are I guess
So I guess that my
how to
question
word
is,
this.
if we don't do a permanent ordinance and the urgency ordinance dies in 10 months, does this die with it or does this stand alone?
This would die with it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further clarifying questions? Okay, see.
One more question.
Okay.
Does the permanent ordinance need a 3 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5 also?
When the permanent ordinance moves forward, it will need a 3 out of 5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'll now open the public hearing and open public comments. Mark?
At this time, the public present in the chambers and on Zoom are permitted to address the city council on this item. If you're on Zoom, please raise your hand to speak under public comment. If you're in person, please file a speaker card. We'll take public comments from the chambers, then Zoom. Remarks are limited to 5 minutes. Your microphone will be muted if you speak on items that do not pertain to this agenda item or after the timer has expired. And we receive no written public comments for this item. Mr. Dorman?
As a wise person once told me, get with the ask and then work backwards. My ask or recommendation is that you extend. And the reason why, but primarily you have more questions than you have answers. And I don't think 2 days is going to give you enough time. With respect to the transformers themselves, and maybe Alan can explain this further, the purpose of a transformer is just like it says. Okay, it transforms that very high powerful electricity converts it rather to go into homes, businesses, whatever. I would suggest, at the very least, take it on a case-by-case basis. In a perfect world, I would suggest everything underground. The reason why, I worked for Providian Financial back in the 2000s. During the rollout, the brownout, the rolling blackout of 2001, I watched a transformer explode. The pressure of that explosion, luckily there was no one in front of the doors of the transformer. They would have been obliterated. So putting it underground, I'm not looking at the butt ugly aspect of it. Aesthetics are aesthetics. The safety factor is what should concern. I think the extension allows you to get those answers. If there is a supply chain issue, well, we're not talking about retrofitting as far as I know. We're talking about, groundbreaking. And if that's the case, it would probably be better to wait to go underground. Now, when it comes to commercial businesses especially, the biggest problem with it being above ground, quite frankly, is destruction, whether accidentally running into it, even though they have, in how they should be done, are monstrous pillars all around it to help protect it. But not just accidental. The worst one is purposeful. And you never know when purposeful will come up. My last concern regarding this has to do with actually the distribution of transformer usage. I would recommend looking at how many are going to be used, as opposed to should it be above ground, underground. Again, underground or above ground should be a case-by-case basis. But the number is what's important. When a transformer blows out, it creates a cascading effect. And so the fewer transformers, the more that the other one will overload. And next thing you know, you have an entire area out and there won't be any power unless the transformers are set up in a redundant manner. And I mean the distribution of power, not the transformer itself. So there are a lot of things to think about, and aesthetics really should be the least of all the questions asked. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one hand raised in Zoom. Cinziana, go ahead.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this item. Listening to the presentation from Alan, and it was pretty good considering he was sick. So I'm happy to see you're doing better, Alan. It sounds like there's two parts to this ordinance that we can segregate between commercial development and housing development, residential. So I would encourage you to explore the opportunity to focus on commercial side of it and extend the ordinance for that type of development. And the reason is that we want to, move away from developer fees type of revenue stream and focusing and stimulating the economic development and bringing sales tax into our city's budget. So, just consider the fact that Brentwood residents, for most part, I want to say, confidently, 95% of them do not want more residential development. So focusing on applying this emergency ordinance for commercial development and stimulating the faster development of those, I think will be a very good approach. Like I said, from a supply chain issue, why would this be a concern for the city? I don't understand that part. If developers encounter supply chain issue, that's simply their problem. The city approved all their projects, gave them a lot of concessions. Everything that was in the pipeline was processed timely. And why do we want to give them even more concessions? That simply we are not required to do, because that's how it feels, this particular ordinance, especially for residential development. As elected officials, you do have a duty to ensure the current and future residents are safe. If you decide to extend this ordinance for residential development, and also, so keeping them safe, ensure their great quality of life, that our city maintains high standards for years to come. If you approve this extension for residential, you're lowering the standards and mark the start of not being better in Brentwood. Some of you ran your election campaign on this slogan, so now is the time to show that it was not just an empty promise, but actually a commitment. These boxes are an eyesore. That's a given. I don't even have to tell you that. They were never approved for use in our city. For that reason, I'm pretty sure. Also, they present safety issues since the transformers cannot be masked all around as per manufacturers, PG&E, and CPUC guidance. The street face cannot be covered in any way because, as Alan mentioned, it has to allow public access from the street side. And also, since they cannot be masked, will allow children, pets, and even adults to encounter these boxes and being exposed to accidents. Would have been helpful if the staff report would have included CPUC's code around this unit and present a comparison of safety standards between underground and pad installed transformers. There are several sections in the Public Utilities Code that talk about safety issues for pad transformers, 701, 761. 8056, just to mention some of them. So another aspect, how will the homeowner insurance rates be impacted by having these boxes on their front lawn? I understand the delay on delivery of housing units impacts the projected revenue stream to city budget. At the same time, it is a sign that Brentwood, as I already mentioned, under your leadership, some of you have been there for more than a decade, did not make any progress on creating revenue stream from business tax as opposed to continue to relying on developer fees. The 1.5 million mentioned in the packet will be used for salaries and pension for employees who currently sounds like they sit idle. You have the opportunity to assess until 2025.
The speaker's time had expired. I have no additional speakers with their hands raised or no additional speaker cards.
Thank you. At this time, we will close public comments, and I need a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
We have a first and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Okay, at this time, we will move into council discussion. Vice Mayor.
Can we talk about the safety issue? Not just the safety itself, but for example, the implication on insurance rates and coverage?
Thank you for the question. I am not aware of any impacts to insurance rates or regarding pad-mounted versus subsurface transformers. That's not something I've seen, but I don't have any definitive answer for you tonight on that, Councilmember Meyer, Vice Mayor Meyer. The other question with regards to safety, similarly, I don't have safety records between a pad-mounted versus subsurface transformer. They're all equally doing the same thing. Subsurface transformers, you would think, are more subject to flooding, so that would be a concern. But they are designed such that to accommodate that. As far as pad-mounted, as Mr. Dorman mentioned, especially in commercial areas, they are properly placed behind a raised curb, in addition to bollards around them to ensure there's no accidental bumping into them. As far as purposeful, that's another issue, but not something that I don't know how to respond to that kind of situation.
So maybe that's a question for when we get into the next discussion.
Sure.
But I don't recall seeing in this packet anything about pillars surrounding a commercial pad-mounted transformer as opposed to landscaping. Did I miss something?
That's correct. The recommendation from staff was for the screening to be subject to residential subdivisions, projects. From my walk around the town of above ground transformers and commercial developments, they all, by default, they're all on raised curb. They all have protections around them. I think PG&E is pretty particular in making sure those are protected as well. It's in their best interest. They are really involved with the placement of those. So when I do come back with the permanent ordinance, I can come back with more details about that as well, if that's council's direction.
Thank you. I do, I can see the wisdom of doing the extension for the sake of, as was mentioned, getting some of these other questions answered and having discussions about any kind of a annual evaluation and the safety issues and the size and the numbers and all of those things at that discussion. But interested in what other people have to say.
So I am definitely wanting to go further on what Darren said. We are just here extending what we already have. So I appreciate the robust dialogue, but I feel like we've already given direction and we have a date to come back to talk further about the actual permit for the interim one is what we have. And I think my concern is stopping what we're already doing because we need to have a discussion. Sometimes we sit up here and we say what the residents want, and I have to tell you, after our last discussion, I went and talked to a bunch of neighbors. I walked my neighborhood, which is fairly new. It was established in 2018. There are above ground transformers all around that area, and they're so inconspicuous. They have these little rock covers that are actually cute, you can't tell. They have like fake grass covers that people do. And one of my neighbors said, well, how is it that you as a council can decide on my property? Because some of them are in people's driveways. How can you decide what I put over it because you want to choose the aesthetics of my house? And that resonated with me. I was like, shouldn't it be the resident's choice to choose what type of covering, not ours, to say, as of today in 2014, will we think someone, like all the residents of Brentwood would want? So I would rather just, for me, my discussion is, I think we need the extension and then we can have the discussion on size. I also saw, this may make Council Member Mendoza really happy. I saw really tiny ones about this size. In one house, in front of one house, it was like metal, it was taller, and I was like, oh my goodness. Let me, for the camera, it was like that thought, like a little bit. Anyway, I want people at home to see what I'm talking about. But it was tiny, and I was like, oh, that would make that woman real happy. And then they had the ones that actually, the picture that Alan has in his presentation. My lip gloss is not great. Sorry, everyone. I'm seeing myself. It actually is bigger than most of the ones. I drove so many neighborhoods, and we have a lot of these. This is not something new that's coming, and residents have had them. I think we're going to be better. Yes, they should be underground for all the reasons that Mr. Dorman talked about, but until we can do that, I think I've been looking at what have we done, and we don't have the big ones. Now, if you go on Sand Creek in front of Eye Care Galleria, great doctor there, by the way, there is a large one, and all around it, there are these concrete, exactly what Mr. Dorman described. There are about 4 or 5 of them around that transformer. Pillars, thank you. I'm like, these concrete things, the pillars there to prevent. And I think that would be a great example if you would like to see what one looks like in Brentwood. I drove up and I was like, oh, that's the big ugly one. So that is huge. It is ugly. But there's also several businesses in that complex that rely on that size transformer. So, I mean, right now for me, it's just given the time for us to come back to have the discussion about size. I also would be thinking when we have the discussion, if we're going to go smaller, is that safe for residents? Like, I want to have both conversations about both perspectives about safety. But as far as insurance, I have never heard that insurance thing because a lot of us have pad transformers right now, and it's never come up on my insurance personally that, oh, what size pad transformers on your block? Can you drive and see if you have one? Never heard State Farms or any other company like that ever ask. So yeah, this is interim. This is just to keep what we have. And then I think the bigger discussion is coming in July about size and aesthetics and safety.
Yeah, so I'm the one who sent this back, and I sent it back because I wanted size. And it sounds like you have that conversation started with PG&E. So yeah, I'm not ready to vote for this until we get the size. And I understand that some people don't care. I actually talked to an installer today of these units for PG&E, and there are cities that have size limits, 2 by 3 by 3. So my concern is if we don't have those size limits like other cities do, we're not better in Brentwood. We're actually being worse. So I would like it to come back with a specific size. And the other thing is, this is before you, Alan, but staff has approved stuff that doesn't look really great when it's on them. So I would like us to have the standards of what gets put around them. And yeah, I mean, residents can do whatever they want after they move in. Well, no, actually they can't. There's guidelines as to what they can do around there. But I mean, I just, Adams Lane Apartments, and I will never forget that because that looked awful after staff allowed them to do something different with the architecture. And staff thought it was fine, and then residents saw it, and those are the people who called me because I don't drive over there. So, I think it needs, we sent it back specifically for size, and you come back without size. So I'm waiting for size, and that's when I will feel comfortable voting for this. Until then, and I mean, you have a call out, you have a meeting, you come back at the next meeting after you talk to them, and we put in the specifics on size and design standards. And I think that's something we can talk about. We got your pictures, so what design do we want? Does it need to match the house? Does it not need to match the house? Because again, I've been to areas where it looks awful, and I mean, I'm picky about that stuff. So I'm not ready to move forward because the ask that we asked was not delivered. And there's just a lot of reasons right now. And I'm not down with a permanent ordinance at all. Like at all, I'm not down with a permanent ordinance because PG&E said that it's going to start coming into stock in 2024. So why would we change our underground code to something above ground permanently when we know they're going to start getting them in 2024. Like, it doesn't make any sense if this is going to last 10 months. So we know, and let's be honest, it's cheaper to do. It's cheaper for PG&E. It's cheaper for the developer. If I were a developer, I'd be fighting for this. If I were PG&E, I'd be fighting for this because it is cheaper, and it's cheap, and it costs less, and it looks cheaper too. So I don't think that this is the right thing to do for residents. Again, it went back because we asked for something, and the ask was not answered. So I'm still waiting for that answer.
Darren?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I could just go back to my initial conversation. So what's before you tonight is just an extension of the urgency ordinance, which by state law is required to be the whole thing adopted or rejected. Or if you don't renew it, it'll expire in 2 days and it requires a 4/5 vote tonight. What was requested of staff by the city council was to come back with a permanent ordinance, that's what's going to come back in July. Tonight is purely the urgency ordinance that's looking to be extended. That's the only thing that's being discussed tonight. And then in July, maybe earlier, as Alan stated, we'll come back before with all of the information that was requested by the city council. So I want to make sure the council understands that this is purely what is required so that we are able to maintain an urgency ordinance until such time their permanent ordinance is able to be put into
I
place.
beg to differ. I don't think we asked for permanent ordinances. I think permanent ordinance, that's something staff is pushing for. What I asked for in that motion was for size and landscaping standards.
And we were unable to amend an urgency ordinance. And I believe that Karen could actually talk about the possibility if it expires, is there an opportunity for a city to create a new urgency ordinance if this one was to expire to include the items that Councilmember Mendoza is requesting?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, if this ordinance does expire, it would be difficult to adopt a new urgency ordinance because state law requires that there's some change in fact or something that kind of hinges on the ability to adopt an urgency ordinance, which at this point, I don't know that we're aware of. So if this urgency ordinance would expire, then we would not have regulations in place with respect to the transformers until and if we would get a permanent ordinance in place.
So we would have an ordinance in place. It's just the underground, which I heard today from someone who installs them. They are trickling in. So there is the possibility of them to install underground. It just might not be as fast enough because actually the government stepped in and started funding the underground transformer because it was such an issue. So if we don't extend it, then they just have to wait for their parts to come in and do underground, correct? We still have the old one on the books.
You're correct. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thank you.
For permanent, we can set annually, like Vice Mayor said. I think when we do have that conversation, I get your perspective. I would be more comfortable if we're only setting an ordinance for every annual period to do a look back and see if we even still need something. But if we don't, I always like to play devil's advocate. If we don't have our ordinance, big projects like big box brands can't even come and set up because they won't have the ability. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So between now and July, if something was ready to break ground, would there be any official standards that we would have any control over that have been stated so far in the urgency ordinance? I mean, the size thing is a concern, the number is a concern, but I'm just thinking about between now and when we actually get to have that discussion where we can make some amendments to it.
Correct. So if the council extends the urgency ordinance this evening, your director of engineering will be able to work to ensure that a project is able to move forward with an above ground vault. If you do not extend the urgency ordinance this evening, if someone comes in 3 days from now and begins the process or finalizes their process, Alan will not be able to sign off on an above ground, and that would stop any project from moving forward.
And it wouldn't even be just July because we're talking about having first conversation in July. It would be further out because it would be the third read if we did implement something.
Correct. So I think the idea is to hopefully bring back an ordinance for council's consideration and adoption if you want in July. and then you are correct, that's the first reading. Then there's a second reading, and then it does not become effective until 30 days after that time.
Is there any differences between the first time we did this and this time?
This is the exact same ordinance
Okay.
before you as relates to the urgency ordinance.
Okay.
If I could add, just, it does say the city engineer may waive undergrounding requirements. So it's still, when I do receive, and I'll be honest with you guys, I prefer subsurface transformers as well. So if there is a change in the supply chain and they are available, let's say today or tomorrow, I am not going to approve any pad-mounted transformers. And it says specifically in this interim ordinance, urgency ordinance, that, it should be only considered, if there's unusual problems such as prolonged supply chain delays. So if that's no longer in effect, then I would never consider it as a valid waiver of the requirement. So I hope that gives you a little comfort, between now and July or August when the ordinance and if we do get that far, if supply chain issues are still an issue, that from my seat, as I receive plans, I'll always keep tabs of the availability. And if it turns out they are available, I would be sure to not approve the plans showing pad mounted.
How do you verify if it's available or not?
I would, when I get these submittals, probably make a quick chat with their designer. That's kind of the first process. The designer and the developer, are there subsurface transfers available? And on top of that, I actually have a good contact with PG&E as well to check on that, because PG&E has a
Okay, so I guess my thing today is I'm not happy about this ordinance at all. If it's coming back in July, I need it to be so detailed and so specific, because this is permanent. Like, they look ugly. Like, even the PG&E installers say they look ugly. It's not something we want. So I just want to make it look the least amount ugly as possible, because I wouldn't want it outside my home. I don't think anyone would want it.
Technical term, right?
Yeah, the least amount ugly.
I had one of those-
Unsightly. Let's use
I
that.
remember the one I had in front of my house when I was a kid. That thing was ugly and it was huge. I remember
Well,
that.
But here's the problem, and this is the other reason. There's a house over on St. Andrews that has a below ground. And the below ground, I don't know if Tim told you about this or how it got taken care of, but the family called, I met with the family, and they're like, it's rusting, PG&E's not coming out. So I just need to make sure that these will be maintained, because where, like, I can't see rusting when I'm driving by, I can see rusting on a pad mount when I'm driving by. So it's just, we just need to be very careful about our standards. And I do have really high standards. Sorry.
Another question, maybe for Darren. Is there a way to move this earlier than July, August, and then maybe move something out that isn't as timely?
Yeah, so I would say we never like to come back to the city council saying this took longer than we wanted it to. Your director of engineer is working closely with PG&E. At the same time, we try to be cognizant of the council's bringing up, you asked for detailed. I promise you there's going to be something we didn't think of. But we're going to do Alan and his staff does an amazing job of bringing forward an ordinance to you. And then we have an amazing staff that sits here, and sometimes we're able to make changes right on the dais, or we have to continue an item and bring it back. So staff wants to bring this back as quickly as possible. The council has clearly stated that you want to be able to have permanent objective standards for this if there's a supply chain issue related to the underground vaults. So I said July and August, and Alan said hopefully sooner.
Okay, and one last thing. So you're the one that's reviewing the landscaping around them? Or who does that at the end of the day?
That's a combination, actually, it's a combination of myself, community development, and the Parks and Rec side. So we have three hats looking at it.
So when you're reviewing these, what are your standards, your own standards? Like, if you were to look at one today, what would be your standard? Like, if I look at these designs, there's the wood box, there's the cinder block one, there's the poly one. Which one do you think, or they're just the grasses, which sometimes they grow over the box, which even looks worse. But so which one would you choose?
The one I would choose is, as long as I would I had mentioned there's PG&E guidance as far as screening options. So that would be my go-to. I would rely on Parks and Rec on the plant selection.
Well, I think the PG&E gives us a list of plants, right? Like in the Green Book, they have a list of by climate zone, they give us a list. Do we have to stick to that list?
My understanding is no, I think we have our own plant list that we have here in the city that we would use.
Okay. So we don't have to follow their guidelines, and I would think that they'd put plants in there for safety purposes, right? Like these won't blow, like cause a fire, these are less apt to, these are more apt to catch fire.
I think their concern is we have more with the horizontal separation
Okay.
from the transformer. I don't think they go into specifics about what kind of plants they are.
No, there's a whole, in the Green Book, there's a whole
There is.
list by climate zone that they have on there. Okay, I just want to make sure, like, when you're doing this, like, please make them look nice. Like, for the love of everything that is holy, please, like, make them look nice. That's all I ask.
What was your word? The least ugliest?
The least ugliest.
Least ugliest.
The least ugliest.
Got it.
Okay, is there any further discussion? And if not, do I have a motion on this item?
I'll make a motion. I move to adopt an urgency ordinance extending interim urgency ordinance number 1072 adopted on March 26, 2024, allowing permittees to install pad-mounted transformers.
Okay, we have a first,
I'll second.
we have a second. Margaret?
An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Brentwood extending for a period of 10 days, 10 months and 15 days, the interim urgency ordinance amending Brentwood Municipal Code 16.120.120 to authorize the city engineer to waive limited underground requirements and finding the action exempt from CEQA.
Okay, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Begrudgingly, aye.
It is unanimous. The item moves. Okay, at this time, do I have a, at this time, do I have a motion to recess to closed session?
I make a motion to recess to closed session.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. We are in recess. Thank you. This time, we will reconvene from closed session, and I need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
We have a first and a second. There is nothing to report out
was gonna
from closed session. We have a first and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.